Debt. It is one of the things your parents probably told you to never get into, and with good reason. You would not want to be saddled with the thought of having to have enough money in order to be able to pay off what you owe. So if you're ever shelling out way more money than what goes into your bank account, you might want to stop and reconsider all of your purchases. Now, did you know that countries could go into debt too? Countries, like people, go into debt when they spend more than they have. People have spending power when they earn money. Countries, or rather their governments, are able to purchase things with the money that we, the taxpayers, pay with our taxes. Today we're going to be talking about the debt of the United States, one of the most powerful countries on Earth. This is Fraud Explained. To enjoy more of our videos, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell, or else I'll be looking into you too. It is safe to say that nowadays all countries have some sort of debt. However, did you know that the United States is actually in $22 trillion worth of debt? That's a massive amount. You could wrap the earth with dollar bills and still not get close to the amount you need to be able to pay off that debt. And guess what? With each minute that passes, that $22 trillion debt is growing. Keep watching to learn how the United States racks up that much in debt and what could happen if they were unable to pay it off. Right now, the government is spending way more than it is taking in. The government is able to accumulate money in one key way: through taxes. They get taxes from the tax that you and I pay whenever we purchase commodities, and that's good. This is how they get to pay for infrastructure, education, health, social welfare, and all of that. However, too much money is flowing out than there is money that flows in. If I had a good credit standing, I would be able to take out loans to buy something like a nice house, a fancy car, or anything I might want to buy that I might not really have the money for at the moment. Because the United States needs to be able to pay for loads of programs it is implementing for its citizens, it also uses its credibility to be able to take out loans to pay for these programs. The government borrows money by issuing bonds. Investors and central banks purchase those bonds and turn a profit whenever the government pays back the interest attached to those bonds. $15.5 trillion of the United States' $22 trillion debt is being held by the public, while the remaining amount is the money that the federal bank owes itself. Over the past few years, experts and economy analysts have warned that a financial crisis is looming, and that there will come a time that when a crisis hits, the United States might not have enough money to get back up on its feet, which would cause great economic repercussions not just in the United States, but in nations all over the world that are closely tied to the economy of the United States. Right now, most investors believe that the United States is a safe bet. Investors believe that if they loan the United States money and slap it with a little bit of interest, the United States will be able to pay them back in full. So, right now, it hangs in that balance. But did you ever hear the quote, "Too much of anything is a bad thing"? That definitely applies to debt, and the amount of time that the United States is taking to pay back that debt. They cannot let it go on indefinitely. Sooner or later, there will come a time that investors would take a look at the United States and consider it a bad risk for an investment because it has too much debt. They would then stop investing money into the country. Now the question stands, why do nations still continue to lend money to the United States? Simple, that's because they still believe in the nation. China and Japan are two of the United States' biggest investors. To get a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's take a look at what happened to Greece. In 2009, a financial crisis happened within the nation that was the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2008. The country's budget deficit exceeded 15% of its gross domestic product. Investors kept loaning Greece money until about 2010, when they kind of realized that maybe Greece would not be able to pay off its debts. Rating agencies drastically lowered Greece's credit rating, which added to the hesitation of investors to invest to let the country borrow any more money. It was also around this time that Greece declared that it might have to default or fail to fulfill its obligations to pay off their debt on their loan to the European Union, which in turn threatened the stability of the Eurozone itself. Investors began to pull out. Greece was thrown into an economic recession until the late 2010s. Numerous businesses shut down and thousands of people were left jobless. To help Greece out, Germany and other European nations had to implement measures that would allow the economic pressure to alleviate even just a little bit. Portugal and Spain suffered relatively the same fate. Additionally, the interest on the debt right now is only around 2%. If the interest rises to 5%, which would make sense in terms of gauging economic patterns, the United States would be driven even deeper in debt. While the economy of the United States is more dynamic than the economy of Greece, these scenarios are still very much possible, and may even happen over the next few decades. Luckily for those who are in their 40s and up, they might not feel the impact of the looming economic crisis. However, if you're in your early 20s and below, the news is not so good. However, how could the United States accumulate enough money to pay off all $22 trillion? Well, they could always increase the percentage of tax that its citizens pay, but that would hinder economic growth. Plus, policymakers would not want to pay higher taxes. They would not want to force those who are in power to pay even more, because God forbid they would lose out during the next elections. If the United States government is suddenly able to pay off its debt, citizens of the United States would be able to see most of their taxes spent on the services that the government is supposed to spend rather than their taxes spent on paying off the nation's loan. Ideally, the average American standard of living should also see a rise. However, some analysts also suggest that not much might actually happen to the economy if the United States were able to pay off its debt. It would do well for the country's creditworthiness, but otherwise, it would just allow the United States to wipe the slate clean and start borrowing money again. Keep watching to see where most of the United States' money goes. Now you may wonder, is it normal for countries to have debt? Well, yes. Most of the nations in the world have some sort of debt to financial institutions, and that's fine as long as it's kept to a healthy amount. If you have a national debt and you're able to consistently pay it off and stabilize the amount of debt you have, you should be fine. The World Bank says that the debt to GDP ratio of a nation shouldn't exceed 77% for a long time because the economy will begin to suffer. If you decide the United States' debt to each citizen it has, it would mean that each person owes roughly $70,000. If the debt remains moderate, then the interest can stay low. Governments could still keep their deficits without running into too much trouble. If the debt gets out of hand and becomes unsustainable, that's when things start to turn bad. The United States debt to GDP ratio is currently well above the 100% mark, and it is still rising. Experts say that small debt increases are good, but if it suddenly gets too big, it could cause the economy to crash. If the economy crashes, businesses will fail and people will get laid off, which would mean less spending power for each individual in the nation. It's a volatile chain reaction, so the best course of action is to pay off the debt as consistently as a nation can. That is the only way to keep the interest rate from rising too high and prevent a country from incurring even more debt. If the United States defaulted on its debt, the economic repercussions would be tremendous. First off, the country's economy would crash and citizens may be hit with a recession. It would be way more difficult to keep in business, and unemployment would also rise because many people would be out of a job. There would also be no more money to pay for social initiatives, as most of the money would be focused on trying to get the nation out of the mess it's in. Not to mention the countries and the financial institutions that the United States borrowed from, they would also be reeling from their losses should the United States say that they suddenly couldn't pay. Why does the United States have so much debt to begin with? Well, it has a lot of factors, but mostly it has to do with their social programs. Social Security and Medicare are two of the biggest factors as to why the United States is in so much debt. The 2008 economic recession pushed the United States in further debt, but these two particular initiatives have driven the United States to seek external funding. According to the data gathered by the Congressional Budget Office, these two programs alone face a $100 trillion shortfall over the next few decades. If you are a recipient of Medicare, you would typically be able to receive a benefit that is way bigger than the amount you paid to be enrolled into the system. Presently, there are almost 80 million United States citizens heading into retirement age, and they would start to make good use of their healthcare insurance. In order to pay for these supposed benefits, taxes would have to increase to around 34%. The same goes for Social Security. People are getting way too many benefits for too little cost. These initiatives need to be checked, lest they get even more out of hand than they already are. So how do you make sure that you stay protected from any financial crisis? Start saving for your own retirement, and make sure you have enough money to pay your bills when you retire. What do you think the United States should do to pay off its debts? What are your thoughts on the looming debt crisis? Let me know in the comment section below and I'll respond to all of you who comment within the first hour. If you like this video, check out our other video on high frequency trading to see what all the fuss is about. Stay tuned and stay educated.